Your generous support makes this ministry possible. Thank you.
George Hegel, another philosophy professor who was in Germany at the time. He lived in the late 1700s and early 1800s. It was Hegel who moved way away from, quote, Christianity and the Bible, and instead talked about the supremacy of the state. How many of you were here last year? Were any of you here at Emmaus last year? Okay. If you were here last year, you might, maybe you don't remember, but I spoke about why Jewish people are liberal at chapel. Okay? In that little devotional, if that's not the proper word, but in that little message, I talked about Jewish people who are liberal in their thinking and have actually replaced the Bible, which emphasizes or commands man to help his fellow man and do it from your heart. I'm kind of summarizing. And instead of God being the reason that we help our fellow man, which would tend to be more biblical, Jewish people who are liberal in this country say government is responsible to help people. So that's where you hear terms, and much of our country believes that kind of thing, that the government is in itself inherently good, that the government is, in our country, is designed to help people less fortunate. And that's why we have many, many programs that give money to the disenfranchised and people who are facing difficulties. There's a whole debate about that. The Christian/Jewish model is from the Bible. We can quote it from the New Testament or the Old Testament. Jesus fed the hungry, cleansed the leper. We talk about praying for people. Churches have benevolence funds, helping other people less fortunate. The Bible in the epistles talks about helping the widow. All those things were, at the time they were written, no government ever helped those people before. The idea they either died, or if there were people around who held to a God belief, they would, out of mercy, as God displayed mercy, they would help, etc. Hegel was one of the first to talk about the supremacy of the state, that the state is all in all, that the state, in essence, under Hegel's model, God is replaced by the state. So Hegel's work in a secular university at a time of enlightenment, when we're talking about reason and logic, moves away from God, the Bible, truth, objective truth, moves to a place where he is now saying it is the state. It is, they are the means for things to happen, not God. Now remember, these people came out of, they certainly left it, but they came out of a Christianized background. Okay, they were at least familiar with the Bible. They were familiar with the message, and they were moving away from it. So there were those that broke away liberally, and there were those who kind of broke away, but dragging the old teachings that the church had, specifically as it relates to the Jewish people. Nietzsche. Ever hear of Nietzsche? Okay. What do you know about Nietzsche? Anything?
He said God is dead.
Okay. He said God is dead. He came out of that. He actually would come after Hegel and take it a step further. That's right. He was the one that announced God was dead. And he actually was the son of a pastor, a Lutheran pastor. He called Christianity a curse. He would adopt the evolutionary model. Evolution, of course, being that things are advancing. Man is getting better. He's evolving. And so that concept for Nietzsche meant that one day man will be God. Nietzsche would argue that compassion, the ability to be concerned, care for those weaker than you, was a weakness. He called churches the tombs of God. Remember, God is dead, so these are tombs. Now think about that. Nietzsche lived right before and died right before the 20th century, the 1900s. What's the implication of God being dead? What would be, if somebody adopted that and made that their reality, if God no longer exists, what comes from that?
There's no accountability to God if he's non-existent and he's not all-powerful, or if he's dead, he's not supreme.
Okay, if God were dead, what would be, how would you view Emmaus Bible College?
Useless.
Yeah. It's a waste of, if God is dead, then what you're doing right now is a total waste of time. If God is dead, then what would be the use of following rules? If God were dead, it wouldn't be bad to break a rule. It would be bad to get caught breaking a rule. So the consequences of a statement like that are incredible. Now, there's another question that you could think through. Do most people today live as though God is dead? I think you can make that argument. And that some even might believe that Nietzsche was correct. And he's still read today. And in high school, senior high school classes and college, they read about him. And so that was a profound thing and affected civilization for a long time, this whole concept that God is dead, that evolution, man is basically a beast that has to be tamed. And we try to fuel the strong ones and weed out the weak ones. It's a whole different mentality, if that's true. Now, there was a document. It's called the Protocols of the Elders of Zion. Anybody ever hear of such a document before? The Protocols of the Elders of Zion. In essence, the Protocols, which is still read today, by the way, the Protocols was a satire about the government of Napoleon. That showed or demonstrated illusions of world conquest. It was written by a French lawyer by the name of Maurice Joly. And instead of it being over between French and Russian, it was replaced with references to the Jews and Judaism. And so the book became the book actually became a standard to demonstrate that Jews are trying to take over the world. That's in essence what you need to know. It's a document that talks about, have you ever heard of conspiracy theories? Any of you? Okay. Well, the conspiracy coming out of the Protocols of the Elders of Zion, in essence, is that there's a group of these people who meet secretly. They're all Jewish, and their design is to take over the world. So, a very famous person in America came to believe it to be true. His name was Henry Ford. Nobody from Michigan here. But Henry Ford, of course, was the one who did the Model T, the automobile industry. He, of course, as a result of that, the car industry became quite wealthy. Dearborn, Michigan, he, at that time, in the early 1920s, published the Dearborn Independent newspaper and wrote in that paper about what he called the international Jew. The whole concept of Jews taking over the world, of finance, because many of them are wealthy, they control the world's money, all this came out of a document called the Protocols of the Elders of Zion. That book, which quite frankly I haven't spent any time reading, but basically a conspiracy book, was compulsory reading of the Third Reich. It is, if you go on the website amongst really anti-Semitic Muslim websites, they are reading the Protocols of the Elders of Zion as well. So it's still used today. Still used today. So you have that whole background, first from a theological point of view, now moving to philosophy, the Age of Enlightenment, this whole concept of Jews and their the struggle. Are they innately evil? Will they throw off the handicap of their separateness and their Jewishness and their laws? Will they adopt? Will they assimilate and become part of society? Or can't they overcome that at all, as some said, because innately it's impossible for them to do it. They're innately evil. You can't trust them. And now we have this whole thing about how they are secretly meeting, trying to take over the whole world. And so that's being perpetrated and believed. Even though this whole, the Protocols was reported to be a forgery, It was not true. It was originally a satire about Napoleon taking over the world, but it was turned into the Jews taking over the world, all that. And the Third Reich, Adolf Hitler believed it, read it, and made sure that youngsters learned it. Now, around the 19th century, in Germany, there was an important concept called the VOLK, Volk. Has anybody ever heard of the Volk? It's not like Spock, if you're Vulcan, if you know Vulcan, not the same thing. The Volk is really a concept that almost has life in it. It's going to be hard for me to explain, but hopefully I'll be able to get it to you. The Volk has to do with the essence of the nation, the soil of the nation. Anybody here ever see the movie Gone with the Wind? Nobody know. Okay, boy, I'm getting too old here. Okay, Gone with the Wind. There's a scene in this movie. It's taking place at near the end of the Civil War in the United States. And the South has experienced, as Sherman is marching through the South, and not Sherman, I forgot the other general. He's Grant. No, it's not Grant. No, I think it is Sherman. I have to catch myself. I think it is Sherman. But anyway, he's marching through the South and burning it everywhere. And there's the character in the movie, a woman who's trying to hold her plantation together. I mean, she's lost her family, most of her family. The men were drafted into the war itself and fighting for the Confederacy, the South. The Union soldiers have marched through, the house is burning, everything. And one of the scenes of the movie is she puts her hands into the soil. She's tattered and beaten and bloody, and she holds the sand, or the soil, it's not sand, holds it in her hand and said, "This is all that matters. This dirt, this land is the only thing that matters." Since you have no idea what the movie is, it's hard to explain. But that, in essence, is what the Volk is. The Volk was this idea of a shared destiny. It would be and it was basically from a German point of view. So this is the land of Germany, long before Hitler, by the way. The Volk offered a feeling of belonging or of shared destiny. It was the very essence of the nation, the blood and the soil. It was sometimes compared to an organism. Volkist thinking, this connection to the land, maybe the best analogy that I can think of, and that to try to help you, is kind of like the way some of us in America feel when we see the flag, the United States. Not everybody feels the same way, but certainly after 9/11, many Americans felt a kinship, a joining together, a united front, if you will, against those that attacked us and our desire to get the bad guys. Some of you are, since that was 10 years ago, some of you were quite young, and I don't know how much you remember of it, but if you remember seeing even the film of our president, George W. Bush, when he went to the site of the Twin Towers and he had the bullhorn. Do any of you remember that? A few shaking heads, yes. Okay, and he said, "I hear you." And what's more, they hear you. And we're going to, get the bad guys. Well, that whole idea of unified, single purpose, pride in our identity, those kinds of feelings, multiply that, and you have a concept of what the Volk was. Okay? Now, just hold that thought, because what I'm trying to do is put together all different kinds of specialties, if you will, or different parts of a society. Its theology, its economy, its politics, its science, its education, all those things together, and we'll see it all pointing eventually towards one person who will kind of lead this group. Volk is one part. Now, at the same time, in the 1800s, there was a science that was researching or trying to explain, the science was really racial anthropology. The thesis was the idea of certain races being born with certain traits that can't be changed. In other words, is a person from a particular race predisposed to be a certain way? Okay? Now think about that. What are the consequences of something like that? If Caucasians, Africans, Middle Eastern, Oriental, Indians, if each race, if the people look different in each race, which we can observe, what would be the implication if they not only look different, but were born with different traits? What would that mean? What would be the well, do we believe that, first of all? Do we believe, okay, I'm Jewish, so there are going to be certain traits in my personality that are inherent to Judaism? Or I have an African American. There are certain things that are automatically going to happen that person is born with. Or if we have a person from India, they're different from the others, so they're going to have different traits. What's the implication of that?
That you won't see what's actually there because you will just be seeing like the imposed traits.
Well, not even don't. If that's true, what would we call people who would hold to something like that? Well, yes. Well, say it louder. Why do you say racist?
Because that's where you judge somebody just based on what race they are.
Okay, so if we believe that a baby's born and that baby's Indian, and that baby is German, and that baby is, I don't know, fill in the blank, but that they're predisposed because of their race to be a certain way, then yes, we would argue, well, that's racist. And the reason it would be racist is, what would we say instead? What would we say? If that's not true, then every person born is what?
Unique.
Every person born would not be unique?
Wait, what's the question?
Okay. If this is important, if we say that some argue, and by the way, that was a lot of research done in universities that based its research on where the geography of the person was. So that they're predisposed to be a certain way if they come from a certain race. Your statement was, well, if you believe that, then you're a racist. Okay? If you don't believe it, then obviously you're not a racist. What would we say about people and their potential? If we're racist, we're saying, oh, if that person's born there, this is as far as they're ever going to go, or this is how their personality is going to be, on the basis of what, for instance, I'll use myself as an example, because the Jewish stereotype or racist perspective is, oh, these Jewish people are inherently, I'd use the word, shyster. They're trying to get you. You can't trust them. They're sneaky and they're deceptive. Look, there were philosophers saying that Jewish people are innately criminal. So that means a baby's born, it's Jewish. Oh, well, he's going to have a life of crime. It's natural. He can't be anything else. Well, that's a racist statement to make. But if you're not racist and that baby is born and Jewish, what would we say about it?
It can grow up to be any way it wants.
Or not maybe any way it wants, but certainly it's not limited to, in its development, to become just about anything. We would have, if you're not a racist, you're not going to look at a person and say they're predisposed to do something. That's a significant thing. We live at a time when people are very nervous and want to be politically correct, and so we don't want to offend anybody. But during the time in the 1800s, there were numerous scholars who were trying to develop and even prove that this is the case, that certain races produce certain kinds of people consistently, and it's in the genes. It's simply in the genes. So, when we talk about Adolf Hitler and the Nazis, we are going to talk about the supremacy of the Aryan people. It's inherent that they be supreme. So we'll talk about a famous Olympics that was held in 1936 in Berlin, Germany, and a man by the name of Jesse Owens. That name familiar to any of you? Okay. That whole thing played a role in race. Jesse Owens was black. He was an African American. He was a track star. And he was, and by the way, the Nazis believed that black-skinned people were inferior in every way, just as Jewish people were inferior in every way. So now a black man from the United States is going to run a race against the superior Aryans with Adolf Hitler sitting in the stands. It was a huge event. Well, I'm not stealing the thunder, it's past history. I can tell you that Jesse Owens won 4 gold medals. It was huge. But the belief, and the reason it was so huge, is that everybody knew that the whole premise of Adolf Hitler was the superiority of the blue-eyed, blonde-haired Aryan as the model for the evolving of the human race. So this concept of innate weakness was something that they were examining all the time. A person by the name of Christian Lassan, who was a professor in Bonn. Okay. Again, you don't have to remember these names, but I would like you to remember the concept. And the concept is that among Caucasians, only Semites and Aryans build up human civilization. He wrote that history proves that Semites do not possess the harmony of psychological forces that distinguishes the Aryans. And so his argument was that only two groups of people are going to build up human civilization, but ultimately only the Aryans are the ones innately qualified or the ones who will do it the best, because Semites are inherently selfish and less moral. Okay? Yeah. I'm trying to condense it in my head here. Okay. He taught that among Caucasians, only Semites and Aryans built up human civilizations. He wrote that history shows Semites don't possess the harmony of psychological forces that distinguishes Aryans. So he would argue that there's the two groups, the Semites and the Aryans, they have the capability of building up human civilizations, but only the Aryans, or the Aryans are the best qualified to do that because they are less selfish and less exclusive. To summarize it, in his research, Aryans are superior to Semites from a racial point of view. Another philosopher / scientist, well, you don't even have to know his name. Race determines the rise and fall of civilizations. Race. The concept now is being studied during the Age of Enlightenment. The context is important. Age of Enlightenment, reason, logic. Look, race is going to determine where civilizations go. So now we have theology covered. We have philosophy covered in a time of enlightenment. What was the economy like during this transition? From the Middle Ages to the Age of Enlightenment, there was something else happening to society. They were moving from an agrarian society to the Industrial Revolution. There was a change taking place, and they were moving away from almost 100% agricultural economic system to an industrialized one. What would happen when mass production replaces artisans' work? What would happen and what will happen, or what was the reaction of the people when we move away from life on the farm to moving in a more urban area? People became concerned, frightened, economic instability. Not much different than the movement in this country away from industrialized or production kind of jobs to more informational kind of jobs, where technology replaces industry. Most of your parents would remember the closing of steel mills, even if they didn't live in places where steel was produced. The automobile industry has changed in your lifetime. You've seen car labels that have been around for not quite 100 years, but a long time. A name like Pontiac, it's gone, was here. You've seen Saturn, which was during most of your lifetimes, now gone. All that poses a huge concern, fear even, amongst those that were raised amongst that as to the uncertainty of what the future is. So I'm trying to give you a more modern thing to relate to what they related to. Here it wasn't automobiles, it was most everybody was a farmer. Now we come to the age of industrialization, and there's an uncertainty that comes about. Who's responsible for this huge change? And who's to blame when somebody is on the losing end of it? Remember the protocols to the elders of Zion, this teaching that there is a conspiracy of people who meet in closed doors who are pulling the strings to make these things happen. Who's doing that? Well, during this period of time, knowing that inherently these Semitic people are inherently selfish, exclusive, that's going to contribute to the thinking of the populace. That if there's blame to go around, we must find a scapegoat, and many times it would end up being the Jewish people. Okay, the political climate during this time. If I tell you, I mentioned two names, and see if you can tell me if you can relate to them. One of the names is the Reverend Jesse Jackson. You ever hear of him? Okay, one yes. Two yes? Okay. Raise your hand if you heard of Jesse Jackson. Okay, half the class. Jesse Jackson right now, to help you, if you want to read about him in the newspaper, because he's already been there, is in Wisconsin. Do you know what's going on in Wisconsin? Any idea what's happening in Wisconsin?
Is that where, like, the Democratic senators fled the state?
That is correct. What's happened, and I'll try to explain it to you, because it is, in a sense, relevant to my point. All right. Wisconsin elected a Republican governor, and the majority in their House is Republican. 19 Republicans, 14 Democrats. There is a deficit in the budget. And so the governor of the state brought forth legislation that he wanted them to vote on, which would force state employees to contribute when they weren't contributing to pay for their benefits. That's a short synopsis. As a result of that, all 14 of the minority in the Congress, Democrats, left Wisconsin. They fled incognito. That means no one knows where they are. They've been on radio programs with their cell phones and will not divulge where they are, other than they're in Illinois. Okay, so what I'm telling you is true. I know I'm on tape, so it's dated, but I'm telling you that's what's happened. It's happened over a week ago. Okay? Where are they? They're in Illinois. Why are they there? Because in order to pass the legislation, they need a quorum. And a quorum for them consists of 20 of the 33 representatives. And they have 19. Okay. So the question is, what are they going to do? Well, the 14 have inspired progressives, liberals, not just in Wisconsin, but around the country. And so in Madison, they've had as many as 68,000 people come from Wisconsin and other places to protest and to call upon the governor to stop threatening to break the union. That's what they're saying. Okay. One of the people who is sided with the protesters and the 14 Democrats is a man by the name of Reverend Jesse Jackson. Reverend Jesse Jackson is probably in his late 60s today. He marched with a man, I hope you know who he is, named Martin Luther King, okay? In Selma, Alabama, in Georgia. Martin Luther King, we celebrate Martin Luther King Day, who Martin Luther King wanted to, he would advance civil rights. In fact, it coincides with exactly what we were saying. Martin Luther King, in a very famous speech in Washington, D.C., said, "You should not judge the man by the color of his skin." And we agree with that. And Reverend Jesse Jackson, a Baptist minister, has been involved in politics for a long, long time. So there's an incorporation of politics along with theology or religion. Another name, let me give to you. Reverend Jerry Falwell. Ever hear of him? Okay. Jerry Falwell is with the Lord now, a Bible-believing Christian. You ever hear of Liberty University? Okay, in Virginia. It was Jerry Falwell who founded Liberty University. It was called at one time Liberty Baptist College in Virginia, in Lynchburg, Virginia. Reverend Jerry Falwell, a Bible believer, believed in the inerrancy of Scripture, believed in the only way to salvation is through Jesus Christ, all those things. But he too got involved in politics. Before President Ronald Reagan, name you might be familiar with, it was Reverend Jesse Jackson that formulated a group called the Moral Majority. The Moral Majority was a group to promote conservative values and ideas as expressed in the Bible, but he called it the Moral Majority, saying that most people in the country, the majority of the people are for morality and are against some of what he perceived as the wicked things in the country that have been passed into law. There's a common theme here, and one that people in our country fear, especially Jewish people. And that is, while Reverend Jesse Jackson and Reverend Jerry Falwell have in common reverend in front of their name, that is, clergy, they have nothing else in common as far as their beliefs. Both would be clergy, both got involved in politics, both view the Bible differently, both view politics differently, but both intertwined their religious convictions into the political arena. In Germany, before Adolf Hitler came to power, there were individuals who were ministers who got involved in the politic of the time. That proved to be a negative for Jewish people. By the way, that same kind of thinking of the mixing of religious thought into the state has always been a negative for Jewish people. The pogroms under the czars, government, army, calling them Christ killer, was the merging of religious thought into the politic of the area, and it brought problems. The Middle Ages, religious ideas, Jews are Christ killers, merged into the armies of the king, Prince Richard, King Richard going off to get the infidel with the giant red cross, the merging of the government, in this case a monarchy, with religion, proved detrimental to the Jewish people. So in this period of time, you had many individuals, some even ministers, who got involved in local politics. I'll give one example I can give you. He's not a very famous person. He is in the study of the Holocaust, but not a very famous person, not one that a lot of people know. His name was Adolf Stocker. You don't have to know his name. But he was an ordained minister. Okay, so he was a person of the cloth, a Bible-carrying minister of the gospel during the late 1800s, whose desire was to teach, in his own words, the whole counsel of God. As a believer, he felt it was his responsibility to get involved in the system, to try to change the system and to enhance the system, because by merging the biblical foundation into society, it would prove to be a positive thing. He personally believed in the Protocols of the Elders of Zion. He bought it. He believed that there was a conspiracy. He also believed in some of the things that he had heard about some of the inherent nature of the Jewish people. And so here was a Bible believer who understood that from a theological point of view, the Jews killed Christ, and he held to a replacement position or a supersessionalist position. But because of his conviction to get involved and desire to preach the whole counsel of God, he wanted to protect Germany from the Jewish people. That was his platform as an ordained minister. So for him, as the world was coming into the 20th century, this was the late 1800s, he wanted to remove, in a legal sense, as much influence as possible of the Jewish people upon the society around him. So a movement began around this time in politics in general of the time to restrict Jewish activity and immigration and exclude them from government positions. And in fact, to keep a census and an awareness of the Jewish population and where they were. The picture that I'm trying to paint in a short amount of time is that when you converge lots of these different ideas, you have a setting up of a target group of people that are going to be harmful to your society. Now, I'm not saying they won the day, because Jewish people in the late 1800s in Germany were doing okay. These were not movements that won the day right away, but they were out there, and people were aware of them. Okay. Now, the question becomes, how did Jewish people respond to all these kinds of things? If you were Jewish living at this time, how do you deal with all these different facets against you? Well, just as there were two views in the Age of Enlightenment those who were liberal about it and those who were very conservative about it, those who held that, just change, don't be separate, don't be so Jewish, so to speak, and you'll be fine, to those who say there's nothing you can do to change. The Jewish reaction to this was also two different ways. Number one, the liberal view. The liberal view was, okay, we're going to change. We want to change. We want to demonstrate to you that we're just like you. But we're going to come short in just that we're not going to go 100%. So the argument would be, I'm Jewish. I'll always be identified as a person who's Jewish, and that will probably mark my difference, but in just about every other way, I won't be celebrating your holidays, I might be celebrating mine, but I dress like you, I work in the same place you work, everything about me is the same. Probably in a similar way, Micah, the way you said, I've met Jewish people, but I didn't notice anything different about them, except that you knew they were Jewish, right? And they knew they were Jewish, which meant that that still separated them from you. But that's about the only thing. And that's kind of the way they were in Germany. They were trying to demonstrate that they are in every way a capable citizen, and they were willing to not be quite so different, but not to the extent that they were willing to give up their identity as being Jewish. That was the liberal view. Short of conversion to Christianity, they would just about be like everybody else. The conservative view is that we are different, not in our essence. That is, Judaism teaches that God created the heavens and the earth and all that is in them, including human beings. That is, we're part of the human race, which makes us all the same in our essence. We are different, not in our essence, but our religion is different. Our practice of our religion is different. So the conservative German Jew who took a conservative view would say, look, I'm German, but I'm a Jewish German person. And so whatever my responsibilities are to my country, I will fulfill them. But I will fulfill them as a Jewish German. I am not the same as you in my practice of my religion, but in my essence as a human being, I am the same. By the way, this struggle was so felt in Germany that at the same time all these things were going on, something happened within Judaism as well. It was this time period that we have the record of the first Reform Jewish group. Up until this time, when there was a bar mitzvah, we talked about that. Those of you who know Jewish customs and culture or Judaism, I've taught it here. We know there's three different sects within Judaism. There is Orthodox Judaism, Conservative Judaism, and Reform Judaism. In an Orthodox synagogue, a woman would never be bar mitzvahed. At 13, a young man becomes a man when he has his bar mitzvah. There is no opportunity in the Orthodox synagogue for a girl to go through such a thing. There is in the Reform movement. And at 12 years old, there is what's called bat mitzvah. So, in Germany, the first recorded bat mitzvah takes place. It takes place in Germany. There is a struggle within Judaism to define itself. It's evolving too, changing, becoming, a strain of it is becoming much more liberal. So within Judaism, there's this desire to try to handle the anti-Semitism that comes from theology, that comes from philosophy, that comes from educational institutions through their science, saying that that the Semite himself is innately different to the detriment of society. So they have to react to all these things. They're trying to figure out how to do that, and struggling with this liberal reaction versus conservative reaction. So this was a period of time when politics, religion, economy, and education were pointing towards an anti-Semitic view of the Jewish people, and they were struggling to battle it back. And that was the struggle they had.